Fix this engine and I'll retire right here, right now. Tommy Torch Mackenzie's voice boomed across the garage bay, his laughter harsh and cruel as he gestured toward the mangled Ferrari F40 engine sitting on the workbench like a metal corpse, his massive arms covered in tattoos and grease stains from 30 years turning wrenches crossed over his chest as he stared down at the man standing in the garage doorway. The homeless man was thin, maybe 55, wearing a Marine Corps jacket so faded you could barely make out the insignia. His jeans held up with a piece of rope, his boots split at the seams. His face was weathered, his beard untrimmed, his hands scarred and calloused. He'd wandered into Mackenzie's Premium Auto Works looking for odd jobs, maybe washing cars for $10, maybe sweeping floors for a meal. What he'd found instead was humiliation. "Did you hear that, boys?" Tommy turned to his crew, 5 mechanics in matching red uniforms, all younger, all watching the show with varying degrees of amusement and discomfort. "The homeless guy thinks he can fix what I couldn't fix in 6 weeks. A Ferrari F40 competition engine that blew up on the Nürburgring, that stumped 3 master-certified technicians. That the owner's paying $85,000 to rebuild, and Captain Cardboard here thinks he's gonna solve it." The crew laughed, some genuinely amused, others just following Tommy's lead because he was the boss, and you didn't cross Tommy Mackenzie if you wanted to keep your job at the highest-paying private garage in Dallas. What Tommy didn't know, what none of them could see past the torn jacket and the smell of someone who'd been sleeping rough, was that the man standing in that doorway was Master Sergeant James Ghost Collier, United States Marine Corps, retired, 20 years of service maintaining FA-18 Super Hornets, some of the most complex aircraft engines ever built. Machines worth $70 million each that couldn't afford to fail at 40,000 feet going Mach 1.8. Have you ever watched someone mock genius because they only saw poverty? Mackenzie's Premium Auto Works occupied a 12,000-square-foot facility in North Dallas, catering to clients who drove cars worth more than houses. Ferrari, Lamborghini, McLaren, Bugatti. If it cost more than $300,000 and had an engine, Tommy Mackenzie could fix it. Or so his reputation claimed. He'd built that reputation over 30 years, starting as a kid in his father's garage, working his way through every certification, earning respect through skill and intimidation in equal measure. At 52, Tommy was a legend in the exotic car world, commanding $350 per hour for his expertise, featured in automotive magazines, consultant for racing teams. His personality was as oversized as his skill set. Loud, profane, aggressive, with a particular contempt for anyone he considered beneath him, which included pretty much everyone who wasn't rich or famous. The Ferrari F40 engine sitting on his workbench represented his first real failure in a decade. The car belonged to Marcus Whitmore, oil executive, net worth $470 million, who'd brought the engine back from a private track day in Germany, where it had catastrophically failed during a high-speed run. 6 weeks ago, Marcus had delivered the destroyed engine with one instruction: fix it. Money is no object. Tommy had quoted $85,000. Marcus hadn't blinked. But 6 weeks later, Tommy still hadn't solved the problem. The engine would start, run for approximately 9 minutes, then overheat catastrophically at 8,400 RPM, destroying internal components. Tommy had replaced pistons, rebuilt the cylinder heads, recalibrated the fuel injection system, consulted with Ferrari specialists in Italy. Nothing worked. The engine kept destroying itself at exactly 8,400 RPM, exactly 9 minutes into operation. His reputation was on the line. If word got out that Tommy Torch Mackenzie couldn't fix a Ferrari, his 350 per hour rate would drop faster than that engine's RPM. So when James Collier walked into his garage that Tuesday morning looking for work, Tommy's frustration found a convenient target. "Listen, buddy," Tommy said, his voice dripping with condescension. I don't need someone to wash cars or sweep floors. But I tell you what, you fix this engine, prove you're some kind of mechanical genius, and I'll give you $1,000 cash. Hell, I'll retire and give you my job." The crew laughed again. One of the younger mechanics, Carlos, 23, fresh out of tech school, didn't laugh. He was watching the homeless man's eyes, and something about the way the man looked at that engine made Carlos uncomfortable. Not the look of someone who didn't understand, the look of someone who understood too well. James stood perfectly still during Tommy's performance. He'd heard worse. 20 years in the Corps, dealing with officers who thought civilians were idiots, dealing with pilots who treated maintenance crews like servants, dealing with a world that measured worth by rank and pedigree rather than skill. He'd learned patience, but he'd also learned something else: that engines didn't care about your rank or your reputation. They spoke a language that you either understood or didn't. And James Collier understood that language fluently. "May I look at it?" James asked quietly. His voice was gravelly, unused to speaking much these days. "May I look at it?" Tommy mimicked in a mocking tone. "Oh, absolutely, sir. Please, examine our Ferrari. Should I get you some tea while you work?" More laughter. James walked toward the workbench. Up close, the engine looked like organized chaos, components laid out with Tommy's expert precision. Diagnostic equipment surrounding it, like medical monitors around a critical patient. James's eyes moved across the engine with the methodical efficiency of someone conducting a systems check. 45 seconds of absolute silence. Tommy watched, his amusement fading into irritation. "Well, you got some brilliant insight, or your timing calibration is off by 0.03 degrees, James said, his voice still quiet. "And your fuel pressure at high RPM is compensating for a problem that doesn't exist." Tommy's face flushed red. "Excuse me." James pointed at the camshaft. "This engine was built for sea-level racing, but it blew up at Nürburgring, which sits at 2,024 feet elevation. The air density is different. Your fuel injection system is calibrated perfectly for Dallas altitude 296 feet, but you're testing an engine that needs to run at Nürburgring altitude. The computer's trying to compensate for conditions that don't match. So it overfuels at high RPM, which causes thermal buildup, which leads to failure at 8,400 RPM when combustion temps exceed tolerance." The garage had gone completely silent. Every mechanic was staring at James with expressions ranging from shock to disbelief. Tommy's face had progressed from red to purple. "That's the most ridiculous. Your diagnostic computer," James continued, walking to the laptop connected to the engine, "is reading FR at 11.8 to 1 at high RPM. But for racing at Nürburgring altitude with this compression ratio, you need 12.4 to 1. The engine's running rich, which creates excess heat, which degrades the ceramic coating on your pistons, right?" He pointed at the disassembled components here. "See the discoloration? That's thermal degradation from excessive fuel combustion." Carlos, the young mechanic, moved closer. He'd been the one running the diagnostic tests. The FR readings had been consistent at 11.8 to 1, and the textbook said that was optimal. But he'd never considered altitude compensation for a European track. Tommy found his voice. "And I suppose you learned all this from, what? Changing oil at Jiffy Lube?" "I learned it maintaining FA-18 Super Hornets," James said simply. "Aircraft engines need to perform optimally from sea level to 50,000 feet altitude. You learn to think about air density, fuel mixture, combustion efficiency across different atmospheric conditions, or your pilot dies." He turned back to the engine. This Ferrari engine isn't fundamentally different from an aircraft engine. It's internal combustion, precisely calibrated, intolerant of errors. The principles are the same. Tommy's mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. James's hands, those scarred, calloused hands that Tommy had mocked, moved across the engine with absolute certainty. If you recalibrate your fuel injection to compensate for Nürburgring altitude and reduce your timing advance by 0.03 degrees, this engine will run perfectly at 8,400 RPM for hours. He looked at Tommy directly. Want me to show you? The challenge hung in the air like gun smoke. Tommy Mackenzie had two choices. Admit that a homeless veteran had solved in 3 minutes what he couldn't solve in 6 weeks. Or double down on his pride and risk being proved wrong in front of his entire crew. Pride won. Fine, Tommy said, his voice tight. You got 15 minutes. You make any adjustments you want. We'll run it. When it blows up again, you're out of here. And when it works? James asked quietly. Tommy laughed, but it sounded hollow. Then I guess I retire. James nodded once and turned to the engine. His hands moved with the muscle memory of 20 years, finding tools without looking, making adjustments with micrometer precision. He pulled up the engine computer interface, typed commands that made Carlos lean in to watch, modified fuel maps and timing curves with the confidence of someone who'd done this thousands of times under far worse conditions than an air-conditioned garage in Dallas. 8 minutes of total focus. The crew watched in silence. Tommy's face was unreadable, hovering somewhere between rage and dawning horror. Finally, James stepped back. Start it. Tommy himself moved to the controls. His hands were shaking slightly as he hit the ignition. The Ferrari F40 engine roared to life, its unmistakable howl filling the garage bay. Beautiful mechanical perfection. The sound of 478 horsepower channeling through Italian engineering. RPM climbed. 2,000, 4,000, 6,000. Tommy held it there, watching diagnostics. Everything green. He pushed it higher. 7,000, 7,500. 8,000. The engine screamed. The 9-minute mark passed. The engine kept running. 8,400 RPM. The death zone where the engine had been destroying itself for 6 weeks. The engine ran clean. No overheating, no thermal degradation, no catastrophic failure, just pure, perfect operation. Tommy held it at 8,400 RPM for 2 full minutes, watching the temperature gauges with disbelief. Everything optimal. He brought it back down slowly, the engine purring through its power band like a mechanical cat. Finally, he shut it off. The silence after that engine noise was deafening. Every mechanic in that garage was staring at James Collier with new eyes. This wasn't a homeless guy who got lucky. This was expertise real, deep, proven expertise that had just solved a problem 3 master-certified technicians couldn't touch. Tommy stood slowly. His face had lost all its color. He looked at the engine, then at the diagnostic screen showing perfect readings, then at James. How long were you in the Marines? He asked, his voice small. 20 years, James replied. Aircraft maintenance. FA-18s mostly. Some Harriers. Some V-22 Ospreys. Why? Tommy couldn't finish the question. James understood anyway. Why am I homeless? Because when I got out 3 years ago, I had PTSD. They wouldn't diagnose. Injuries, they said, were pre-existing. And a skill set that doesn't translate well to civilian applications. I applied to 47 automotive shops. None of them called me back. Turns out Marine Corps Master Sergeant doesn't mean much when you're competing against kids with AZ certifications and no baggage. He gestured at his worn-out appearance. This is what happens when the world decides your service doesn't matter as much as your paperwork. The garage was silent except for the ticking of the cooling Ferrari engine. Carlos spoke up, his voice hesitant. "Boss, we've been trying to solve this for 6 weeks. He did it in 8 minutes." Tommy Mackenzie stood at a crossroads. His pride said to pay the man his $1,000 and send him away before anyone else found out that a homeless veteran had shown him up in his own garage. His conscience, buried under 30 years of ego and success, said something different. Tommy Torch Mackenzie had built his reputation on being the best, and he'd just been outworked by someone he'd mocked for being homeless. The choice he made next would define the rest of his career. He walked to his office, returned with his checkbook, and wrote something out. He handed the check to James. James looked at it. "Not $1,000, $5,000. That's your signing bonus," Tommy said. His voice was steady now, the bluster gone. "The job starts Monday. 75,000 salary to start. Full benefits. Housing assistance until you get on your feet." James stared at the check like it was written in a foreign language. "Monday, you show up here at 7:00 a.m., Tommy continued. "You're my new head diagnostics specialist. I'm going to learn from you, and you're going to help me build something better than what I've got." He looked at his crew. "Anyone got a problem with that?" Silence. Carlos broke it. "No problem, boss. About time we had someone here who actually knows what they're doing." A ripple of nervous laughter. Tommy looked back at James. "I said some terrible things. I judged you by your jacket instead of your knowledge. I'm sorry. I can't take it back, but I can try to make it right." James's hand trembled as he took the check. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll show up Monday," Tommy replied, "and maybe teach these kids and me what real mechanical expertise looks like." Mackenzie's premium word had spread. They had a diagnostic specialist who could solve problems no one else could touch. James Collier had an apartment, new clothes, and the respect of every mechanic in Dallas. He'd also started a program, hiring veterans with mechanical experience, training them in exotic car maintenance, giving them a path from service to civilian success. Tommy never did retire, but he did change. The garage culture shifted from intimidation to collaboration. He learned to see people beyond their appearances. And every time he looked at that rebuilt Ferrari F40 engine, now running perfectly in Marcus Whitmore's $1.2 million car, he remembered the day a homeless veteran taught him that genius doesn't advertise itself with clean clothes and certifications. One evening, after the crew had left, Tommy and James stood in the garage sharing a beer, looking at a new impossible problem, a McLaren P1 with an electrical gremlin no one could trace. "You know," Tommy said quietly, "I tell people I learned everything I know from 30 years in this business. But the most important thing I learned in 8 minutes from a guy I almost threw out of my shop." James smiled. "What's that?" "That the person you underestimate might be exactly the person you need. Sometimes the most valuable expertise comes wrapped in the most unexpected package. Sometimes the person you mock is the person who'll save you. And sometimes a master mechanic's greatest lesson isn't about engines. It's about seeing the human being in front of you instead of the uniform they're wearing." If this story reminded you to look past appearances and recognize skill wherever it shows up, hit that subscribe button. Share this with someone who's ever been underestimated because of how they look instead of what they know. Drop a comment if you've ever been dismissed because of your appearance, and then prove them all wrong. Your story matters. Your skills matter. And sometimes the world needs a reminder that genius doesn't require a dress code.